I'm going to start this episode off by quoting a scene from one of my favorite movies of all time. See if you can guess this movie. So, Mary, what do you think the chances are of us ending up together? Not good. Not good like 1 out of 100. I'd say more like 1 out of 1,000,000. So you're saying there's a chance. Now, most of you are like, of course you know it's Dumb and Dumber. If you haven't seen Dumb and Dumber, you might want to pause this video right now. Go watch that. It is a classic, one of the greatest movies of all time, in my opinion. But what are the chances? So that reminds me a lot of when I was new in the business. Okay, now I think of this wasn't a great idea, but when the morning meetings would come to an end, the leaders would go one way for a quick leaders meeting, and then you've got Lord of the Flies going on. You've got us entry levels in our own little circle after it all came to an end. And I remember one of the most popular discussions in those Lord of the Flies meetings of the entry levels, kind of like, okay, so we're supposed to figure this business out. You know, the question of like, well, what are the chances? You know, like, gee, there's a lot of turnover that's happening in the business. And oh, that's a really good question. You know, people coming into the business, what are the chances of a person succeeding? And I remember in this one particular meeting, you know, this new rep came up to me. His name was Kevin. And Kevin's like, Jamie, you know, I'm thinking of leaving the business. And I'm thinking to myself, based on everything I know about Kevin, I'm like, Kevin, you probably should leave the business. You know, I was no expert, but I'm like, I don't think Kevin's going to do well. Doesn't seem like the kind of guy that's going to one day run his own business. And then, you know, so I convinced, maybe I was a better salesman than I thought, but I convinced Kevin to pack it in. Okay, time to move on. And then I thought to myself, how does Kevin's decision to leave the business somehow affect my probability, affect my chances? It's the same train of thought of like, well, how does the failed marriage of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, okay, many of us obviously have seen some news, around that, but how does their failed marriage somehow affect my chances of my marriage? Because I remember before marriage, I was thinking, it's such a high divorce rate in this country, 40%, 45% of marriages end in divorce. How does somebody else's failed marriage somehow influence my batting average, my percentage, my chance? So again, just good food for thought. So I remember as a new leader, people coming in, new people coming in, and I was asked the question, and to this day I'm still asked the question, what are the chances? What are the law of averages of someone succeeding in the business? Somebody, however you want to define success, becoming an owner, becoming a consultant. And I remember my answer being just a real simple answer. Well, the chances are 100%. 100%? You're telling me everybody that comes through the business is going to go on to become an owner, go on to become a consultant? Oh no, I'm not saying everybody. I'm just saying my chances are 100%. The probability of me becoming an owner, it's 100%. It's 1 for 1. It's not 1 in 100. I've already made the decision. And so people are like, oh, that's interesting. I'm like, listen, there is no other number other than 0 or 100. You either make the decision to move on, so it's 0, or you've made the decision to run the test and go the distance and hit your goal. It's either 0 or 100. There's nothing in between. The question is, what decision have you made? And so I think of Stephen Covey. Here's a quote from Stephen Covey. He says, "We are a product of neither nature nor nurture. We are a product of choice, because there is always a space between stimulus and response." So you get stimulus, you get something that happens. You've got response, how you respond to that. And in between the two, there is freedom of choice. A choice needs to be made. And so really, I think of my decision-making process. Okay, so it's very simple decision-making process. When it comes to big decisions, maybe not so much the little decisions, but big decisions like, gee, should I get married? Who should I marry? Gee, career, how far do I want to go with this thing? Those are big decisions. I make the decision on the front end. Okay, I'll take some time to think through the right decision. I'll consult people to come up with the right decision. But I make the decision on the front end, a logical decision, and then I simply have to manage that decision throughout time. I don't have to make a decision on the back end. The decision's already been made on the front end. And so if you haven't made decisions, if you don't follow that process, you're vulnerable to then making those big life-changing decisions, when you're at a low or you're emotional. I don't want to be making decisions like that when I'm emotional. I want to make them on the front end and manage those decisions on the back end. So those are my thoughts when it comes to chances. Again, I think it's a common question that's asked. Like, well, what are the chances of me being successful? And again, how is it that other people's decisions somehow affect your probability? It doesn't. You just got to get into decision-making mode. You got to get into commitment-making mode. Make it on the front end, manage the decision throughout time.